Well, Richard, friends, thank you first of all for that very warm welcome. I made a slight face when you talked about entertainment, the Select Committee, because I can think of many words to describe the hours of evidence that we have taken, and entertainment wouldn't necessarily be top of the list, but we did have a rather bizarre moment, as some of you may have seen on Thursday, when I'd been questioning Michael Gove about what would happen in the event of a no-deal Brexit. And I put it to him, I said, in truth, none of us, including you, knows what is going to happen on the 1st of November. And he paused for a moment, and then he said, the future is only known to the Almighty. At which point I replied, unfortunately, the Almighty is not available to give evidence to the committee. And I suppose that's where I want to begin, because the motivation behind what we have been able to achieve in Parliament this week is an absolute determination on the part of a majority of members of Parliament to prevent the Prime Minister taking us out of the European Union without an agreement on the 31st of October, to prevent a no-deal Brexit. And I want to begin by paying tribute to all of the MPs, because when people come up to me and say, you know, congratulations on what you've done, I reply, it's been a team effort. And you are part of the team, all of you who have come here today. Because the group of people with whom I and others have been working, we actually have very, very different views about how Brexit should finally be resolved. So people voted for the bill this week who voted for Theresa May's agreement and would vote for any agreement that Boris Johnson brings back tomorrow. And there are people like me and a growing number of people, including Antoinette Sandbach, who was one of the 22 Conservative rebels with whom I was on Any Questions last night, and said she had now come to the view that the only way to resolve this was to go back to the people and ask. And I will return to that in a moment. And it's because it has been a partnership. I have new best friends I didn't realise I would ever have before, including Philip Hammond, the former Chancellor of the Exchequer, with whom there are probably not many other things that he and I would be in agreement on, but we are in agreement on the danger of a no-deal Brexit. And when the former Chancellor, who was in the Cabinet until the week beginning, the 22nd of July, gets up and talks with such passion and conviction about the economic damage that a no-deal Brexit would do to our country, we ought to listen. And one of the things I find most frustrating, I find many things frustrating about the position in which we find ourselves, is that the answer when you say a no-deal Brexit would be damaging is either you're all telling a bunch of lies, or people will say, I don't care. And they say I don't care because they will argue, and that is a view that some people hold, they say my sovereignty is more important than the state of the economy. Now, people are entitled to hold that view, although I disagree with it. My response tends to be, okay, that's what you think, but if I may say so, with respect, you're being very, very free with other people's jobs and livelihoods and prospects and communities. And you will have seen all of the evidence, the Cabinet Secretary telling the previous Cabinet that a no-deal Brexit would make us less safe. You've seen the government's economic assessment, which says that a no-deal Brexit would be the most damaging outcome of all. I've sat chairing the committee, and the farmers' representative has said it would be absolutely disastrous. I've been there when Make UK, which represents fantastic British success stories, our manufacturing industry, which is so important to the country, to Leeds and to Yorkshire, describe a no-deal Brexit as an act of economic vandalism. And the truth is, we would be walking away at an instant from the best trade deal we've got with our biggest, nearest and most important and most valued trading partners. But it wouldn't be the end of Brexit, and this is part of the argument that hasn't yet been discussed enough. Boris Johnson says, I want to bring Brexit to an end. And I'm prepared to leave on the 31st of October without a deal in order to achieve that. Leaving on the 31st of October without a deal would not bring Brexit to an end. As I said in the House of Commons on Wednesday, it would only be, to borrow a phrase from someone else, the end of the beginning. Because what happens the day after? And if you have time to spare, have a look at either the video or the transcript of our two evidence sessions this week about what would happen in practice between Dover and Calais. What happens if lorries haven't got the right paperwork? The French have built 300 spaces to put lorries in that don't comply. And I asked Michael Gove, what happens when the 300 spaces are filled? Because, by the way, it's 10,000 trucks a day going across the short straits. Well, it doesn't take a lot of trucks not to have the right paperwork for 300 spaces in Calais to be full. I said, well, what happens then? And he said, well, the spaces would be full. I had actually worked that out for myself previously, but you only have to then think, well, if they can't come off the ferries can't unload them. And if the ferries can't unload them, they can't get back to take the next lot of trucks, and the nightmare begins of the trucks on the M20, and then who knows how big the queues would be. Now, this is a practical problem, but what is the consequence? It means that car factories that are waiting for parts, because car factories don't have warehouses anymore. Well, they do. They've just got wheels on them. The trucks are the warehouses, because the trucks are arriving every day, just in time, just in sequence, to deliver the right size wheels and the fascia for the behind the steering wheel, and the right sat-nav and the right engine, because for many cars they are built to a specification. So it's not just in time, it's just in sequence. And what are they going to do if the parts don't arrive? We had another conversation about what would happen to food. Now, he said on the Andrew Marr programme on Sunday there will be no shortages of fresh food. And the British Retail Consortium, who know a little bit about the availability of food because they're experts in that. You remember Michael Gove famously said, had enough of experts? We had such fun with him. He used to be a member of the committee. And Sadiq Khan came to give evidence one day, and when Michael Gove asked him a question, Sadiq said, I'm not really sure about that. I would need to take some expert advice. And no one quite twigged, including me. And then Michael Gove asked him another question. Sadiq said, I think we really need to go and seek information assessment from experts. And it took me 3 responses from Sadiq to realise exactly what was going on, and then finally Michael Gove twigged as well. But anyway, I divert back to the British Retail Consortium. They said it's categorically not true the supplies of food will not be affected. Now, these are practical questions that affect our national life. And then you get into medicines, what happens to farmers in particular in Northern Ireland, who are going to be facing whacking great tariffs. There's a huge amount of trade across that non-existent border. And what do we discover this week? The government is now trying to pull back from the basis of the agreement about an open border in Northern Ireland. And it's not just about the impact on trade, it's about the impact on the psychology of the peace process. Anyone who has been to the border, we went as the Select Committee, we stood there. There was a little line, well, it wasn't a line in the road, because there's one lot of tarmac up to there, and another bit of tarmac up to there. Northern Ireland, Republic of Ireland, Northern Ireland. I said, no one has, never in the history of politics have so many politicians been photographed by so many photographers staring at a piece of tarmac, which is what we were doing. But the point is, there's nothing there. Trucks, back and forth, cars back and forth, people back and forth, living their lives. And the Good Friday Agreement achieved many things. One was to say to the people of Northern Ireland, you do not have to choose. You can be British, you can be Irish, you can be both. And it was an astonishing act of political courage and leadership. And it's brought peace and stability. And we know that the moment you start to put any checks on the border, be it a camera, be it someone saying, can I see your papers? Can I see your customs declaration? Have you paid the correct tariff? Then there are people in Northern Ireland who remain unreconciled to the peace process. They will push down the camera and they will attack anyone who is standing there. So what is at stake here is something that has been astonishing, because if you'd said to me 40 years ago when I was growing up in London and bombs were going off, you got on the tube and you looked for the bag that didn't have an owner, an apparent owner, that's what we all did. If you'd said to me then, I think it is possible that Ian Paisley and Martin McGuinness will sit together as the First Minister and Deputy First Minister of a powering-sharing government in Northern Ireland, and I am a born optimist. It's how I'm able to get up in the morning, given the state of the world. I probably would have said to you, I'm not sure I'm going to see that in my lifetime. But we did. And it is absolutely irresponsible of the government to threaten by its policy to undermine the Good Friday Agreement and the peace and the stability of the court. Passed the bill and it will get royal assent on Monday. I am very concerned that the Prime Minister is going up and down the country saying, I will never apply for an extension. Now, there's only one way you can reconcile that statement with the fact that the European Union Withdrawal Number 6 bill will become the European Union Withdrawal Number 6 Act on Monday, and that would be if he ceased to be Prime Minister. And I would regard that as an unexpected bonus of the passing of the bill. Because either we have the rule of law in this country, or we don't. And it's really very simple. And there can only be one possible answer from a government minister, from a Prime Minister, to the question, will you obey the law? And the only possible answer can be yes. And that is very important. But we constructed the law in the way that we did to minimise the opportunity for funny games, because we're dealing with a Prime Minister here, unlike his predecessor. We passed legislation previously. I never personally thought that Theresa May would ever take us out of the EU without a deal, because I think she had a great sense of responsibility as Prime Minister to the country. She knew as a former Home Secretary what it would mean for the security of the country. I cannot say the same about our current Prime Minister. And if on the 19th of October, the day after the European Council, a deal has not been done, and as the bill very generously allows him, if he hadn't been able to persuade Parliament to agree to leave without a deal, which he isn't going to be able to because we've demonstrated there's a majority of us opposed to that, if he hasn't written the letter on the 19th, then people will be in court on the Monday morning to seek to get the courts to order him to comply with the law. Now, do we think the Prime Minister is serious about negotiating a new deal with the European Union? Well, I would agree with you. Because he spent the first month saying, abandon the backstop, give us a call when you've agreed. And then he sat there. Now, it doesn't strike me as that is the action of someone who's serious about trying to negotiate something else. We've had in the last week, Angela Merkel a week ago saying, we haven't seen any proposals. We've had Simon Coveney, the Taoiseach, the Foreign Minister of the Republic of Ireland, saying, well, nothing's been tabled. We had Michel Barnier briefing EU diplomats. He said, we're in a state of paralysis. And although David Frost, the government's negotiator, has been in talks, he is trying to unpick the previous agreement in a way that, in the end, I don't think is going to be acceptable to the European Union, because the backstop is there for two reasons. One is the Good Friday Agreement and its protection, but the second reason is to protect the integrity of the single market and the customs union. And to somehow expect the EU to say we're prepared to chuck that in the bin because you want us to, is, I think, it's very unlikely that they are likely, that they're going to accede to that. And therefore, what is the plan? I think the plan has been all along to try and take us out with a no-deal Brexit on the 31st of October. That, I think, is what the Prime Minister's intended. But he's now in a real pickle of his own making, because the final bit of that plan was to get an early election. And the funny thing about the Fixed Term Parliament Act is you don't have to vote against an early election, you just have to abstain. It has exactly the same effect. And when the motion was put on Thursday, it failed to achieve the 434 votes required. So our whip said, you can go home now because you not being here is exactly the same as you being here voting against it. And he lost. They're going to try and bring it back on Monday, and he's going to lose again. And that's why, that is why the papers this morning are full of briefing from frantic cabinet ministers who are saying to him, we need another plan. I would say about our current Prime Minister simply this. He has no plan, no mandate, no majority, and we're not letting him take us out of the EU with no agreement. The last thing I want to say is about how we resolve this crisis affecting the country. Now, we meet here in Leeds, in my constituency, and we will split like the nation right the way down the middle. And we have to understand why the referendum result went as it did. We have to understand the reasons, some to do with Europe, but a lot of them not to do with Europe, that led people to vote in the way that they did. This was a cry as they felt it to be listened to, a feeling that they had been forgotten, that they had been left behind. And it's been our collective failure that our country has come to this point. And I say that in respect of all political parties. The tragedy of Brexit is it is not the answer to those problems. Because if it makes the economy less strong than it would otherwise be, and that's what the government says, it admits it's going to have to spend money on compensating businesses that are adversely affected by a no-deal Brexit. Now, how ridiculous is that? Because I'd like the money to be spent on social care. I'd like it to be spent on education. I'd like it to be spent on a decent train service between Leeds and Manchester. I want it to be spent on ensuring that in the 6th richest country in the world, 1 million people a year go up to a total stranger and say these words. I know we've never met, but I can't feed myself and my family this weekend. Can you help me? It is a scandal. It is a scandal that that is what's happening in our country in the 21st century. And there are so many other things that we need to deal with. And Brexit is not the answer. So the last thing I want to say is about how we get out of this, because we can't keep on kicking the can down the road. The bill will achieve an extension to the 31st of January. We have a problem with the EU because they're getting very impatient, and at some point they may say, I'm sorry, we've given you so much time, you're still no nearer to sorting this out, that's it. I think it'd be very unwise of the EU to push us over the cliff. Very, very unwise. It's the point I make to every European minister, parliamentarian and other that I meet. But we have to find a way of resolving this. And as you will know, as Richard will know, I was not one of those who after the referendum said, right, we've got to have another one. Because I think we have an obligation to listen to and respect the result of the first referendum. And I've come, however, in recent months to believe that the only way out of this is to go back to the British people precisely because Parliament is deadlocked. Now, healing the wounds and the divisions that the referendum argument and the result has created will be difficult, very difficult. There is not an easy way out of this, but since the people began the process by voting in the way that they did, I think we should go back and be absolutely honest. Say, look, you were told that we could have all our sovereignty back, but we keep all the economic benefits. Michael Gove, the day after we vote to leave, we'll hold all the cards. Has anyone seen the cards? Anybody? No, one of the easiest trade deal histories. You know all of the phrases. And the truth was, that wasn't true. It wasn't true then, and we know now even more so that it wasn't true. Brexit involves choices, it involves trade-offs. And Mrs May, in the end, wasn't prepared to face up to those because of the difficulties of her own party. And that's why I voted against the deal, not because of the withdrawal agreement. We owe the money. We've got to protect citizens' rights. Brits abroad, EU citizens here. We have got to ensure that there is a transitional period, and we have to protect the open border in Northern Ireland, and that's what the backstop is all about. It was the absolute lack of clarity in the political declaration about where we're going, because I'm not prepared to take a step into the unknown, especially with a Conservative government that's now being led by Boris Johnson. I wouldn't trust him an inch at all. Secondly, a Canada-style deal doesn't solve the problem in Northern Ireland. A Canada-style deal leads to friction on the border between Dover and Calais. It's not the right thing for the future of our country. But we do have a deal that was negotiated. And I would pick up once again and argue for what Phil Wilson and Peter Kyle proposed some months ago. And they said, look, let's compromise. Over here is a no-deal Brexit. We are resolutely opposed to this. There is no mandate for it. It's the most damaging outcome. Over here, and I know this will disappoint some of you who would say revoke. I don't think we can do that either, because if you argue for revoke, you are saying to 17.4 million, your vote didn't count, we're cancelling the result of the referendum, forget the whole thing. And if you think we're facing a difficult situation when it comes to confidence in our democracy today, I would simply urge you to pause and think what we'd be facing in those circumstances. And therefore, the compromise in the middle is to say, we're prepared to put Mrs May's deal, even though we didn't vote for it, to the people. That's what leaving looks like. Those are the trade-offs. And on the other hand is remain, and it is for you to choose. And the great merit of doing that would be we would get the final decision. And you and I may not like the outcome, because there is no guarantee of how people would vote in those circumstances, but I think it is the right and the democratic thing to do. And the challenge for us now, given the fact the Prime Minister has bound himself into a set of circumstances that he cannot get out of, is to come back to the argument in Parliament and to say, we cannot carry on like this forever, it's doing damage to our economy, we need to go back to the people and ask them. And I would urge you, as I know you all have done already, but please do it again. If you have an MP who hasn't yet come out in favour of a confirmatory referendum, get back in touch with them again, because opinion is slowly shifting. Antoinette Sambach, one of the 21 rebels I was on the radio with last night, has come to that view in the last week. And we need more MPs to come to that view, because that's the only way we will resolve this. And in that campaign, every one of us in this room knows we'll be out there fighting for us to remain a member of the European Union, because for all of the difficulties and the problems that we face, this is about a Britain that is outward-facing, outward-looking, embraces a relationship with its partners, wants a strong economy, and we want to pass on something better to our children. That's what's brought us here today. Be of good heart, be of good cheer. Thanks for your support this week. Keep up the fight. Thank you.